Mandy, it's so great to have you on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I would love for you to share a little bit about who you are, where you live, what, kind of your life right now. And then I want to talk about a subject that you talk about quite a bit. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. But before we dive into it, please tell us a little bit about who you are in case our community is not familiar with you.
Sure. I am Mandy Hale. I live just outside Nashville, Tennessee. And I am the creator of The Single Woman, which is a brand and a social media movement that is really designed to inspire and encourage and bring hope and inspiration and maybe healing and even a little humor to the lives of single women across the world. And I've also had the wonderful opportunity to write 6 books, and they're not all about singleness. It's really just sort of life in general that I write about now. But so I get to do this very cool job of working with and ministering to single women, and it's a huge privilege.
That's awesome. It's such an incredible space that you're in terms of just, your willingness to just step into it, lean into it and say, hey, let's talk about an issue that, people sometimes don't like to talk about in church world. It's like, how do we address this? How do we talk about this? But it's a very real pain point. It can seem like this waiting season or a season where you're kind of, waiting for some kind of result or outcome. And then it feels very elusive and it's not going to come. And so where do I find myself in life and in this world when I'm in this waiting season? I love that you do it so candidly. And like you said, with so much humor. But I think that's where I'd love to start. Maybe we start with your experience and what is it that brought you into this space to say, hey, I see a need. I know that I'm experiencing some things, some pain points that other people must be as well. Can you share with us a little bit of your own journey that inspired this?
Absolutely. It was it's over a decade ago now. I was on the flip side of what was, in hindsight, an extremely unhealthy relationship. I had just gone through a pretty significant breakup. That we were together for about 2 years. And I was in this space of, being single again and a little bit heartbroken and a little bit uncertain about what was coming next. But at the same time, feeling, strong and empowered. And hey, I walked away from this really negative relationship that wasn't good for me. And now I kind of want to, celebrate that fact. And I really started looking around for anyone, anything, any books, any social media platforms, any people, any movement whatsoever that was speaking about singleness in a positive light to sort of connect with, because that's what I do. I'm a reader. I like to educate myself. I like to, anytime I'm going through something or entering a new season of life, I like to kind of glean all I can from other people who have walked through what I'm walking into. And it just wasn't there. And I thought, wow, there's really nobody out there talking about singleness in a positive way. So maybe if I can't find it, then maybe I will just become it. And so at the time, I had set a New Year's resolution for myself. I think it was possibly the only one I've ever kept in my life, to start writing creatively on the side, because I was working in full-time public relations for a technology company, and great job, but just wasn't very creatively stimulating. So I started a little blog on the side, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to write about my life and my journey and singleness and where I'm at and where I've been and where I hope to go, and we'll see if anybody connects with it. And very quickly, people started to connect with it. And women, started just a very little unassuming Twitter page to sort of promote the blog, and wanted to be the single lady, because at that time the Beyonce songs, All the Single Ladies, was really popular, and the single lady was already taken. So then I chose The Single Woman, and it was amazingly available. And I sort of unknowingly branded myself in that moment. But I mean, very quickly, the Twitter page just started to explode, and women started to just really connect with the message. And the thing I kept hearing was, hey, you're giving us a voice, and you are, speaking life and hope and encouragement about singleness. And it's not gloom and doom, and you're
Right.
more likely to be struck by lightning than to be married after the age of 35.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I just saw like what a huge void it was and what a need it was, and how single women just like me were out there looking for someone to speak for them in a way that felt, good and positive
Yeah.
and hopeful.
Yeah. And you might say purposeful, right? And
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
sometimes, and this is what you speak to quite a bit, is that it can feel like this quote unquote season of singleness is an aimless, purposeless season where you're just kind of, on tiptoe, awaiting for when you finally arrive at this season where your life changes because of marriage and you found that somebody. And now you can step into the life that God has for you, right? And that can
Yeah.
be the subtle messaging of our culture, especially Christian culture. I mean, I grew up going to a Christian college where the joke was ring by spring, right? And if you, I mean, you're getting married early because, for many reasons, right? Purity was one of those reasons where you're like, well, we can't wait, so we got to go ahead and get married, and so but if you graduated college from this small Christian college and you weren't already, at least having plans for a marriage with someone, then whoa, okay, something's going on.
Yeah.
And so that messaging has leaked into our culture. I love that you spend a lot of time talking about that. This is not just a season where you just kind of anxiously await getting married, but this is actually a season to be embraced that's purposeful. Um, can you talk about that a little bit? That distinction, because that's a very important distinction, but also a very subtle one.
Yeah, there's a quote by Bishop T.D. Jakes, and he says, single people don't live, they wait.
Mm,
And that speaks such volumes, because I do think it's sort of it's almost instilled in us to, well, just wait faithfully, your time is coming. And it's not a bad thing or a negative thing to want to be married and to have hope and be prayerful and a vision that marriage is something that's for you. I mean, I still hope to be married at some point in my life myself. But I think if you pin all of your hopes and dreams and life's purpose on that, you are literally missing out on the entire plan for your life.
yeah.
I mean, for me, it was, I had to make the choice. Am I going to sit around and wait for this magical day when, Prince Charming gallops in on his white horse and rescues me from my life?
Right.
Or am I going to create a life that I don't want to be rescued from,
Mm,
and I don't need to be rescued from? Because, yeah, I mean, we can spend our whole lives, and it's not just when it comes to marriage. Marriage is definitely a big one, but I think that some people, there's always that tendency, oh, I'm going to wait till I get married. I'm going to wait till I have children. I'm going to wait till I buy a house. I'm going to wait till I graduate, till I get my dream job, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on. But if you're in a constant holding pattern of waiting till that next big thing to be happy, to find purpose, to follow your dreams, and to step into, the plan for your life, then you're literally just going to spend your entire life waiting.
mm,
Whereas if you look at my life, I assumed I would be married in my 20s, and then I assumed I would be married in my 30s, and now I'm 43 and I'm still unmarried. And if I had just, sort of been sitting around twiddling my thumbs, waiting, I would have wasted years and years of my life, and not just of my life, but of my life's purpose.
yeah.
And I can see so clearly in hindsight that this was always the plan for me. Now, is it the plan for me to be single forever? I hope not. If it is, we'll roll with it and I'll make it work. But I had to be single in order to realize, God's purpose for my life.
Yeah.
And maybe everybody's purpose isn't to write a blog or to write books or to speak to singleness in a positive way, but there are many other things that you could be doing with your life. And there are many other, there's a greater destiny for you as a human being that has absolutely nothing to do with another person.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing whatsoever. And that's not to say that another person coming into your life at some point isn't going to, add to your destiny, and the two of you are going to realize this really great purpose together. That very well may be the case, but that does not negate the fact that you individually, you were created as you were for a purpose. You are walking in the season that you are for a reason, and there is a greater plan for your life that you don't need another person to realize.
Yeah.
I have a quote in my very first book: you don't need a significant other to lead a significant life. And that still rings true.
Wow. That is so good. That's so good. I remember reading a book by Dietrich Bonhoeffer called Better Together. Had nothing to do with marriage. It was all about community, right? It's all about the idea of community. But one of the assertions that he made was that often people can lose their personhood in community. And I think you can say the same thing about marriage, right? You lose your sense of individuality and personhood. The reality is in marriage, two become one. That's what Scripture says. Two become one flesh. However, those two are still two very distinct persons, right? Their life is just aligned in such a way that they become quote unquote one flesh. But that can get so melded together in the culture of, especially Christian culture when it comes to marriage, that now you no longer have a personhood, but God created you with a unique and distinct imago Dei, right? With the image of God he put in you, with a distinct calling, distinct purpose, distinct intimacy that he wants to have with you. And so you're right. I love that quote, that just because you don't have a significant other does not mean you can't lead a significant life. In fact, God calls each one of us to lead a significant life based on our own personhood and uniqueness. And in order to make a great marriage happen, Dietrich Bonhoeffer says this about community. In order to make a great marriage happen, I would think that you would have to retain a really strong personhood, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Because that's
Yeah,
what
I mean,
brings the dynamic to the marriage.
Yeah, and another person, they cannot, we have all these movies, the Hollywood, you complete me, and another person cannot complete you. That's just not, they can't make you happy. They can't make you joyful. They can't make you, more meaningful or more, anything. Another person can only add to what you already are. And I think that kind of gets lost in translation, because we are kind of looking for the fairy tale, the quote unquote fairy tale, and the Hollywood ending. And it's like, and again, those are all beautiful dreams to have. But I feel like if you wait around for someone to quote unquote complete you, you will always be incomplete, because even if you do get married at some point, you're going to be looking to that person, that very human, imperfect person, to fill a void in you that cannot be filled by another human being.
Yeah.
I mean, we know we've all chased relationships for the wrong reasons, right, and to fill voids in us that cannot be filled by anything other than God. Right. So if you approach a marriage or a relationship at all from a place of lack, where you're already like, oh, I'm empty and I need to be completed, I'm half of a person, I'm broken, that's just a recipe for disaster anyway. So even if you do at some point, find your person and get married, you're going to be looking to them to be this sort of cure all, be all, end all, the beginning and end, your security, your peace, your happiness, your joy, your meaning, your purpose. And no other human being, no other fallible, human being can ever do those things.
Right. That's so good. So let me set up this question with a little context. Most of the time on the Nothing is Wasted podcast, we're talking about trauma, tragedy, major life transitions, that incite a season of pain and suffering in your life where God shows up and he meets you. And so many times we're talking stories of, divorce, loss, and when I say loss, I mean actual physical loss of a family member, loss of a child, loss of a parent, loss of a sibling, loss of a spouse, chronic pain, sexual betrayal, abuse, some of these things that are very clearly pain, or it's pain seasons, right? Singleness in and of itself is not, and I want to say this because our former podcast producer Taylor Carlier, who shared her story on the podcast before, she would always remind me singleness in and of itself is not a pain point, right? It's not pain. However, the mindset that we bring into it can cause these ripple effects of pain, and we can
Right.
experience singleness in a very painful way, for sure. And there are certain seasons of singleness that are a result of some painful things that have happened, right?
Right.
So I would be curious as we kind of we're launching into this, Mandy. What in your in your journey of singleness, what are some of those big pain points that you've run up against where you're like, oh, this is painful, this hurt, like
Yeah.
and kind of speak to that because I know that so many of our listeners are experiencing that as well.
Well, I think, and this is, a journey that I share in my latest book, Turn Toward the Sun. Like, I think for single people in particular, we really experienced the pandemic in a completely different way than people who had a partner or
Yeah.
a spouse or whatever, who were in a relationship or married or had children and built in community. I think that just the isolation of that whole season of, okay, well, everybody, we don't really know what's going on, everybody needs to stay home. And it lasted longer for some, for me in particular, because of the fact that I have very high risk parents and I was trying to be really, really protective of them. But it's in those moments when you find yourself, you know, completely alone.
Yeah.
And you don't, and it's a very, I think more so in my lifetime than any time I can remember. I think our world right now is a very kind of dark, scary place. And in those moments, no matter how well adjusted you are, no matter how much you might love and appreciate your independence and your solitude, which I very much do, you still have those moments where it's like, gosh, it feels like the world is ending and I'm alone.
Yeah.
I don't have, and then I also went through in 2020 the back-to-back diagnosis of both of my parents being diagnosed with cancer within a month of one another. And my parents are my best friends. And so, and I went through it alone. I didn't have a partner. I didn't have a teammate. I didn't have a helpmate. I didn't have a person. And so I think in those moments for me is when singleness, it's very starkly, clear to me, like, okay, these are the moments when it would be really, really great to have someone to come home to have someone just to lay my head on their shoulder and cry, to have someone to tell me it's going to be okay and to hold my hand and, stand beside me through whatever life challenges I might face. Those moments are very, they can be very lonely and very sad. And as much as I speak about, learning to love and embrace your single life, I also very much speak about the flip side of, yes, no matter how, confident and happy and joyful and sure of yourself and walking in your purpose that you are, walking through life alone has challenges. It just does.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to say that.
Yeah,
I think that you
absolutely.
can have it's the tension of saying, hey, I'm not going to sit around and just waste my singleness. I'm not going to sit around and wait for a magical day when I get married to make my life complete and to fulfill my life's purpose. You can be that person, but then you can also say, but sometimes I feel lonely and sometimes I feel sad and sometimes I just want someone here with me.
Yeah.
It's okay to be both of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm hearing you say, Mandy, is that a lot of the pervasive feelings that you experience, in singleness is loneliness and,
Yeah.
a feeling of not having somebody other than you to kind of walk through different circumstances and seasons together. And, you know, that's very real. That's very, like you said, that is a very, um, and it can be a very painful, stark reality that
Yeah.
will hit you in some very difficult moments, to your point, this pandemic and feeling so isolated, so pulled away from everybody else, you know. Oftentimes in singleness, we can assuage some of that with friendships and going out with people and hanging out, and and that was all shut down during the pandemic, and so it can create that even greater sense of loneliness. And at the same time, not to detract from that, how many marriages did we see that fell apart in the middle of COVID as well?
Right.
Possibly because of the recognition of that exact feeling of like, I'm feeling alone, right? Like there's this partnership, there's this thing that I thought was supposed to be, and yet I feel this sense of loneliness, um, that we're just not, we're not there, like we on the same page or whatever, or this marriage is broken, or we've everything else is hidden this and now it's being exposed. So there's just so much of a these emotions will visit us in very real ways in a lot of different seasons. Which
Right.
brings me to my next point. This idea, or my next question, is this idea of embracing, finding contentment. This is what you talk about quite a bit. Uh, to what degree really does that really help in this season of singleness that people are experiencing? Like this idea of embracing this season. Well, how does that help me to navigate that season a little bit easier? Especially in seasons like COVID, where I'm feeling these very real, like, I don't want to embrace this. I'm feeling real. This hurts. This is lonely. This is a struggle.
Yeah. Well, something my therapist said to me in the midst of, all the pandemic craziness, and she was like, Mandy, you have, been through a pandemic alone. There is nothing you cannot do at this point.
Mm.
And I think that was really like an eye opening realization for me, because I think if nothing is truly wasted, I think if there was a silver lining of the awful pandemic and the isolation and the just everything shutting down, it was learning for perhaps the first time in my life, as much as I have written about and blogged about and tweeted about and Facebooked about and examined the idea of embracing your solitude and kind of learning to love your own company. I don't think until the world shut down, I really fully embraced my singleness.
Mm.
And in the early days of the pandemic, I was baking a lot like everybody. I went through the whole banana bread phase and was doing puzzles and was knitting and, reading a lot of books and just doing a lot of things that were, just really, really simple, but at the same time, really, sort of soul enriching. It was like, okay, I'm just spending time with me, because I had been through a very, very social season of constantly on the go and doing all the fun holiday things. And, then all of that shut down very, very quickly. I mean, we went from normal life to abnormal life, and it felt like the span of 24 hours.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those moments in life where it was like, okay, either you learn to set with yourself, like really, truly set with yourself and your aloneness and your solitude, and you learn to appreciate your own company, or you are going to be miserable for an undefined amount of time.
Yeah.
So, and I think that that's what so many of us are guilty of doing. We almost avoid that setting with ourselves, whether it's through social activities or relationships or career or working out or even church, sometimes being so involved in volunteering and serving that you never truly have to just set with you.
Yeah.
And if you haven't had the opportunity to do that, you really truly haven't had the opportunity to get to know yourself, to get to not just, I mean, we talk a lot about loving yourself, but do you like yourself? Do you enjoy spending time with you? And if you don't, I mean, honestly, I think the question could be asked, how can you expect anyone else to enjoy spending time with you if you don't enjoy spending time with
Yeah,
you first?
right.
So I think for me, it was just, and I think the pandemic was clarifying for a lot of people in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But for me, it was that, okay, I actually have learned that I really love spending time by myself.
Mm.
And I really love just hanging out with me. And yes, when the world opens back up, sure, I want to start being social and seeing friends and doing things again and dating and doing all the things that
Yeah.
come along with quote unquote normal life. But am I still going to carve out time just to hang out with me and just
Yeah.
to, read or journal on my porch or, watch a great movie or whatever the case may be? So yeah, I think you really have to get really, really honest with yourself and say, what am I hiding out in?
Mm.
Because you can hide out in church just as easily as you can hide out in a relationship.
Right.
And if you are constantly avoiding being by yourself, you're never going to make peace,
No.
truly make peace and embrace and love your singleness.
Yeah. That's so good. And what you're not talking about a navel gazing narcissism here where it's like, I love myself. You're
No.
talking about a contentedness in who
Yeah.
God has created you to be.
Yeah.
There's a peace that flows from a peace with God. And
Yes.
there's a peace with ourselves that flows from that. So regardless, right, of even the things, the minute things that we don't like about ourselves or the things that we, would do differently about ourselves, we all have to get to this place where we find peace with who God made us to be and the image of Christ inside of each one of us. And that flows from having peace with God. And what's crazy, but also very um, poignant, is that the only way we can find that is often in those spaces of being alone. That's right. Yeah. Right. Mm. Right. Right. Yeah. Right. That's so good. And you're gonna end up expecting having unrealistic expectations of somebody else, right? And even your servitude of somebody else, right? Life is meaningful because we serve others. That's what makes life meaningful, is that we're able to get outside of ourselves and serve others. But even your servitude will be tainted because it will be out of some kind of expectation of that other person, right? It's subtle. It can be very subtle if you're not content with who you are in Christ, and a contentedness with who we are in Christ brings about a willingness of self-sacrifice and servitude of other people with no strings attached.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
yes. Yeah,
But if
that's
you
good.
don't find that contentedness, if you don't have that in who you are in Christ, you're going to serve other people with these strings attached. You're going to have expectations of your future husband, your future wife, the community that you roll in, because you haven't found peace and contentedness in yourself and who you are, who the Lord has made you to be. And that's, what you're saying, Mandy. I mean, when I lost my wife in 2015, I never thought that I would live life without her. Never thought. That never came. There was not a, as we were dating, as we were dreaming and planning for our lives together, there was not this, oh, you know what? We're going to be married for 7 years and then I'll be without you, for the rest of my life. At age 30, and so that was a very real place of wrestling, of having to come back to, who am I? in this season of singleness and therefore season of loneliness, and Elizabeth Elliot's book, The Path of Loneliness, I've mentioned it on the podcast before, became a very powerful book for me to
Love that
read,
book.
because God invites us into deeper intimacy with Him, which is ultimately our true satisfaction,
Right.
um, in those seasons of loneliness.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you're never truly alone, again, even if you're going to church every time the doors are open,
Mhm.
even if, and I've been there, I've been where I was like serving to the point of I didn't even have time for a relationship with
Yeah,
God because I was doing children's church, I was doing greeting, I was doing student ministry, I was doing this, this, and this. And in the midst of all of that, somehow,
yeah,
my relationship with God got lost. And whereas I found that in the seasons when I'm just more just me, not, and that's not to say don't serve, but I guess the point I'm making is when I found all the busyness has gone away and all the
yeah,
hustle and bustle has faded away and it's just me, that's when I'm able to connect
yeah.
um, with God in such a powerful way. And I think if you're constantly dodging
Mm.
that solitude and that alone time, you're also missing out on so much
Wow.
because you can't, he's not going to shout over the crowd, he's not going to compete with anything for your attention. He is the still small voice.
Yeah,
And if you don't ever get still and have some quiet and some, just you and him face to face time,
mm.
you're going to completely miss that still small voice.
That's so good. That's so good, Mandy. You talked about how a lot of this was inspired for you out of this breakup. It
Mm.
was a very painful experience for you. I know there are probably a lot of people who are listening to this and they've just recently experienced the same thing. Breakup of a dating relationship, breakup of an engagement, maybe even a breakup of a marriage and a separation or divorce. And they're at that place of feeling this real raw pain. If you were sitting down having coffee with that person, what would you say to them?
I would say it gets better.
Mm,
I would say that there is, as counterintuitive as it might sound, there's really no better time for clarifying like what you truly want out of your life
mm,
and your future and your faith and yourself than after a breakup. I think
mm.
that there's a quote in the new book that says sometimes the storm levels us and sometimes the storm helps us level up.
Wow, yeah.
And I think that this moment, it's very much on the other side of any sort of painful loss. It's very much a blank slate. It's very much like a new beginning, a clean, it's like you erase the whiteboard clean and you
Yeah.
can fill it up with whatever you want your life to be and become and look like.
Mm,
So I think that the first thing is you have to let yourself feel all the feelings. You can't hide from the grief. You can't outrun the heartbreak. You can't out socialize the heartbreak. You have to set in it. You have to let it wash over you because the only way to heal it is to feel it. So I think
mhm,
that's step one. I think you have to allow yourself to go through. There are lessons to be learned on the floor. So if you are on the floor
mm,
in fetal position on your knees, you feel like your life is ending, stay there for a little while. You don't have to get up right this minute. Stay there.
yeah.
There are lessons to be learned down there. And when the moment is right and when the time is right and when you're ready, get up and start your life again.
Mm,
And just know that what I have learned in my 43 years of living, and however many years of dating and however many breakups I've been through at this point, is that you will get over it.
mm,
It seems like you won't in this moment, and it will seem like that for probably many moments to come, but eventually there will come a day when you wake up and that person will not be the first thing you think about.
mm,
They won't even be maybe even on the list of things to think about at all.
mm,
So time heals all.
yeah.
Um, the heartbreak will heal. Um, I feel like that's really that's different. I can't, that's different advice. That's someone who, that in particular is advice for someone who's gone through a breakup or a divorce. I feel like the loss of a loved one to death is a much different scenario. And I think
Yeah.
the grieving process is much different and much longer and much more intricate. But I think just in terms of the bad breakups, and I've never been married, but I think just from my friends who I know who have gone through divorce, you will get past it.
Yeah.
And time is time taking one day at a time.
Yeah.
You don't have to live tomorrow today. Yesterday's already happened. Tomorrow hasn't happened yet. You have grace for the moment. Walk each moment as it comes and don't overwhelm yourself with too much with yesterday or tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. Taking it a day at a time, because each of those situations has very much its uniqueness. I mean, all situations of grief have their uniqueness, and so it is important. I think you're right to take this thing a day at a time, recognizing you're not always going to feel this way,
Yes.
and it may be hard to wrap your heart around right now when you're in the midst of it, and you can't imagine not feeling this way. But it is not always going to feel this way. Um, but I love what you said right there. In order to heal, we do have to feel. We've got to
Yeah.
experience these deep places of grief. You know, I, I I'm curious too. Someone's probably listening to this and they're hearing you say, "Hey, listen, okay, this isn't some kind of holding pattern for your life. This isn't some kind of a waiting season." But what, Mandy? What if I feel like, I mean, hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. I've got this hope. I've got this dream of being married, being with somebody, having a significant other. I mean, heck, just dating somebody, right? I want to do life with somebody else,
Yeah.
and and so I'm hearing what you're saying, and I want to be able to embrace that, but I'm not feeling that right now. I'm feeling this dissonance with what you're saying. Are there some practical things that I can do to begin to try to train myself? Because I don't imagine this is something you just stumble upon, right? You don't just like stumble upon embracing this, right? So what can I do practically in this season? Because I want my heart to be wrapped around this idea of embracing it. But I'm just not feeling that right now.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, you do kind of have to allow yourself to feel how you feel, and that's not saying to dwell in it for an undefined amount of time from here to eternity. But I think acknowledging and validating, because how you feel it, I validate that for anyone who's feeling that. I feel that at times too. But I think also recognizing that it's the we're humans and we can have room. There's space in our hearts and our minds and our lives to carry two realities. And it's okay to have that reality of, yes, I really, really want to be married. I really want to have a person, a partner, a teammate. But it's not okay to let that reality stop you from living your life. It's not okay to let those feelings stop you from living your life. And I think I would just encourage you to, one of the biggest things I think that I've tried, I mean, it's really simple, but I try to remember that, don't get so stuck on looking at the one kind of love that you don't have in your life that you completely look past all the other kinds of love that you do have in your life. Because there are many, I mean, yes, romantic love is great, and I don't know that you can really compare anything to it. But there's also love of friends.
Yeah.
There's also love of, family, of community, of church, of your pets, of yourself. There's of your job. I mean, there's so many things in this life to love. And again, going back to the hope deferred, there's so many other things to hope for. So I would encourage you to sit down and, yes, you have this one great big hope, and keep that hope alive. Nobody's telling you to extinguish that hope. I still have that hope. I still have that fire burning in my heart that someday I will meet someone and, we will live happily ever after. So keep that hope, but then sit down and make a list of all of your other hopes, because if you let this one hope eclipse the entirety of your life, that's really sort of heartbreaking just in and of itself. That's more heartbreaking to me than walking through the rest of your life as a single
That's
person.
great. Yeah.
Letting that, it's almost like some people let it become like an idol. Like, if I can just get to the mountaintop of marriage, everything else in my life will be perfect. And then everything else in your life you just completely forget about and neglect and abandon and overlook in pursuit of this one goal.
Yeah.
So I would say sit down and make a list of, yeah, you have this one hope and this one wish over here. But then what are your other hopes? Like, what else do you want to do with your life? What dream do you want to chase?
Yeah.
What great big life goal do you want to set for yourself, or even really small goal that you want to set for yourself and work towards attaining, whether it be, working out more or going back to school or buying a house. Don't wait for marriage to do all these, because again, I think a lot of women too, oh, I'm going to wait to buy a house, I'm going to wait to to be a mom. I mean, for me, I've actually started looking into adopting as a single woman, and again, have the hope,
Yeah.
keep the hope alive, but don't let the hope of marriage eclipse the rest of your life, because there's so many other amazing, beautiful, even God breathed things that you can do and achieve and accomplish
That's right.
in your life that are completely separate from marriage. And marriage might come along and add to that, or marriage may never come along. That's the reality for some people. But if you build your own life and you find that peace with yourself, and you start realizing all these great big dreams that you have for yourself outside of marriage, I really think you'll be okay. And that's kind of where I'm at in my life now. Like, yeah, I want somebody to join me in my life, but I'm not going to stop living my life if they
That's
don't.
great. That's so good. Who knows, right? If you start down that pathway of pursuing your purpose,
Yeah.
maybe that's where that person is down that path, right? Maybe you're needing to do
Right.
some things. The Lord's like, hey, you need to get some things started and going. I've got purposes for you to fulfill right now. And you're gonna that person's down that pathway. And that's how you know that that person's going to be the right partner for you, is because they're
Right.
already pursuing those same purposes too. They're running hard after the Lord, right? And so now it's not, now it becomes this easy compatibility, this complementing relationship, because you guys are walking those pathways together. And uh you just never know. But I think you're exactly right. We can't delay or defer the purposes that God has placed in each one of us. Um
Well, and I can say too, you definitely are not going to meet your person by sitting at home crying, feeling sad about being single all the
that is
time.
so true.
So, yes, sit at home and cry sometimes. We all need
Right.
that good Hallmark movie ice cream night. Do that sometimes.
Yeah.
But you're not, your person isn't going to be magically dropped on your doorstep as you're sitting inside moping about being single. So, it's more likely that you're going to meet someone, like you said, when you are out there, like, chasing that goal or pursuing that dream, or following that, God's leading to some
Right.
bigger destination, you're more likely to encounter someone along the way
That's
to
right.
your goals than you are sitting at home deferring
So
your
good.
goals.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I think and this is what I was talking to my wife about this the other day. I was just kind of having a reflective moment of when was it that it kind of shifted for me in my grieving process after losing my first wife? Like when did it feel like, okay, things began to shift and I began to like embrace life again, or begin to live again, kind of see life as color again. And I think it came to the point where I finally and decidedly chose to embrace what had happened. And, they say
Mm-hmm.
that, right? The grief journey, there's a phase of just acceptance where it's like, this is
Right.
not how I saw it going. This is not even the phrase, this is not how it should be, right? And we can talk about that from a macro level in terms of pain and suffering. God did not intend for death to be entered into this equation whatsoever. And so on that level, it's not how it should be. And yet it is like this.
Yeah.
And so the gap between the not how it should be and the is, right, is I've got to come to a place of acceptance, of reconciling those. And
Right.
once I come to that place of acceptance, or even to the next level of that, embracing that, is when I can live again, is when I can
Yeah.
live out the purposes that God has called me to as a whole person, right? And I think that that is true for every season of our life where, Paul says that in every season I have found contentment, right? And that's the invitation the Lord is extending to all of us in each one of those seasons is how do we find contentment in each season that we're in, knowing that He's the only one that's going to be able to sustain us and fulfill us. Mandy, I want to dig into this a little bit because I think you have a shared experience with a lot of our listeners, but you talk about in a Newsweek article pretty vulnerably about feeling ghosted by some friends,
Yeah.
almost abandoned during this really difficult season where both your mom and your dad received a cancer diagnosis. And I feel like a
Mhm.
lot of folks who are listening to this, no matter what their experience is, they feel that loss of community when they
Yeah.
walk in pain and suffering. How did you navigate that? And how do you come to a place of, even like forgiveness and sorting through that uh, when it feels like your friends
Yeah.
didn't show up in the most pivotal moment of your life?
Well, and I will say after I wrote that article and shared it, I heard from multiple people who said that's amazing that you went through that. Like one of my dear friends, she lost both of her parents in the span of a year, and she said that her like lifelong best friends basically did the same thing to her in that season. And I don't really know what to chalk that up to. Hers was before COVID, so I don't really know that we can blame it on COVID. I know
Right.
that everybody was going through their own personal challenges through COVID and just really trying to survive and keep their head above water.
Right.
So I think that that could certainly be a factor. But I think for me, it was reaching the place where I just stopped asking myself or stopped trying to understand why,
Mhm.
and kind of like what you said a minute ago, just that place of acceptance and saying, okay, these this is what happened. These are two friends. One, I have literally been friends with her since before she was born. Her when we were lifelong friends, lived across the street from each other, like from before she was born, we were connected. And she knew my parents, and her family was my family, and she just didn't show up in that season,
Yeah.
and it was so mind-boggling to me. And I did try. I mean, I think the human inclination is to want to make it make sense and
Right.
to try to find, you know, an explanation, try to sort out the why. But I think the why doesn't really matter so much. I think at the end of the day, um, you can drive yourself crazy trying to understand why another imperfect human hurt you or did something unfair or unjust or betrayed you or let you down or ghosted you or whatever the situation may be. But it's not, no matter how much you drive yourself crazy, you're never going to understand it. And even they probably don't understand it. And you'd never get a satisfying explanation, no matter how much you beat your head up against the wall. So I think for me, just coming to a place of realization of, you know what, true or hard times reveal true friends.
Mm.
And this was a pruning experience for me. And yes, it was painful and awful and even devastating and eye opening,
Mm.
but I'm still here and I'm still okay. And instead of continuing to focus on what I've lost, I'm going to focus on what remains.
Yeah.
And what remained for me was I still have my best friend who I've known since we were in eighth grade, and she has been there, every step of the way and prayed and supported and encouraged. And she never left. She
Mm.
stuck around. And for me, that's worth more than gold. I mean, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, you need to have this long list of BFFs. And for me, that's not the case at all. I mean, certainly I have other friends, but as long as I have that one tried and
Mm.
true ride or die person in my corner, I consider myself lucky and blessed, and I have that. And so I think just for anyone else who might be going through a similar experience,
Yeah.
I think it just comes down to simply deciding that you're going to let it
Mm.
go and that you're not going to let it cause you to lose sleep or steal your peace or your joy or turn it inward, because I think that's also a human reaction to have, like, oh, well, what did I do? Why am I not good enough? Why do you not care about our friendship? Because it most likely has absolutely nothing to do with
Right.
you. It's the other person and whatever they had going on or whatever decision they made or whatever inability to, emotionally show up for you in that moment. That's on them. That's not on you.
Yeah.
So I think just accepting that this is what happened. It is terrible and unfair and I hate it, but I can either let it continue to overshadow my life and define, my life and my friendships, or I can release those people and recognize that they were no longer meant to walk with me on my
Mhm.
journey and move on with my life. And that's what I had to choose to do because I had way too many other things, to
Yeah.
focus on and to more important things like being there for my parents, and, just being a support system for my family and maintaining my own mental and emotional
Yeah.
health. Yeah, I just really had to accept it and then let it go. And I know it sounds easier said than done, but most things in life that really matter are easier said than done, but you still got to do
Wow.
them.
Yeah. Man, I'm Andy, I'm so sorry that had to have been so hard. And it's the same
Thank you.
experience many of us have felt, in these times of suffering and trial is that, you know, for whatever reason, whether it's because they don't know what to say or how to show up, or now all
Right.
of a sudden we are a different version of ourselves because of what we're
Mm,
experiencing, that, their love for us, their friendship wasn't strong enough to be able to ride into that season, or whether it's because the Lord is doing a intentional pruning so that,
yeah.
some of those, I mean scripture says that even the branches that bear fruit, they like once bore fruit, they're still bearing fruit, so to speak, that they have to be pruned away so that the the plant itself can experience this renewed sense of growth.
Yeah.
And, Jesus likens that to our life as well. And that there are some of those seasons that as you're stepping into a new season, a new phase of growth, that some people are not able to go with you there. Um,
Yeah.
and that can be very difficult to palate. And
Yeah. There's a quote that I've always loved by Rick Warren that says, God removed, I'm going to butcher it, but it's something to the effect of God removed that person from your life for a reason. Don't chase after them.
mm,
And I think it is sort of like the human sort of inclination to want to chase after them and say, wait, stop, where are you
yeah,
going? But it's kind of like I think in my life in particular, I have come to recognize that when God doesn't want someone in my life, he just kind of removes them from my
yeah,
life. And I don't mean to say like in some dramatic,
right,
traumatic
yeah,
death way. I just mean he reaches down and plucks them
yeah,
out of my journey and moves them right along.
yeah,
And I've kind of had to just learn to make peace with that and to recognize that, not everyone can go where you're
yeah,
going. And um, I think we kind of expect people to show up for us the way that we know that we would show up for them. And that's just not usually the way it goes.
yeah,
And, just again, recognizing, hey, if this person was meant to be on my journey with me, they would
yeah,
be. And it's been made very, very clear that they're not. And I can either continue to chase after them fruitlessly and waste my own time and my own life and miss out on these other great friendships, or I can just release them and with peace and forgiveness and let them go on their own journey.
yeah. No, that's so good. I think that's helpful advice for the entire thing that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
No matter how someone leaves your life, that it's very helpful to just put it through the lens of trusting God in that. Again, easier said than done. It sounds so
Yeah.
simple, and yet, man, isn't that the battle every single day for us to say, "All right, Lord, I trust you with my lot in life right now. I trust you. I trust that you've got still good plans and purposes prepared for me, and I want to walk in those plans and purposes despite, you know, whether I'm walking with somebody or not, whether I'm walking this alone. And so that, I mean, Mandy, I love what you're doing and the message that you're carrying, how you're helping so many people in this space. And so thanks
Thank
for
you.
spending time with us, and being willing to dive into this, dissect it a little bit more. And this has been so helpful for me, and I know for so many people who are
Absolutely.
listening to this. Where can we follow you? Where can we kind of get some more of the things that you're talking about and really tune in? I know it's going to be so helpful.
You can find me online at mandyhale.com, and then I'm on pretty much any social media at the single woman.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Mandy, for spending time with us. It's been such an honor.
Thank you so much. It was a joy.
Hey, friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.